been a while since I've done something like this, so I figured why not? Mormons are indeed the gift from Yahweh to Jews, to atheists, when they debate Christians. Someone in the live stream chat is saying, Matt Dunlap is saying, talking to Mormons laid the foundation for my exit of Christianity, so this should be something I can relate to. Yeah, someone on Twitter, X, told me about this debate, and I thought I'll review it. It's long, so I might skip parts, so I apologize. But if I were a Mormon, I would use the minimal facts argument that Christians use. In fact, I have it ready here. When did I make this? 5 years ago. 5 years ago. I've been doing this too long. Yeah, this is why I talk about politics more than religion. Because 5 years ago. Look at how young Lycona looks there. But here's the minimal facts argument for Mormonism.
Things. Jesus' disciples taught he was raised from the dead. Therefore, we know it wasn't a legend because it was there from the very beginning. We also know, number two, Jesus' disciples taught the risen Jesus appeared to individuals, groups, friend and foe, so we know they couldn't have been hallucinations. At least not all of them. The group ones weren't. And Paul, of course, he wasn't grieving over Jesus' death. He was glad Jesus was dead.
Keep your shorts on.
And Jesus would have been the last person in the universe that Paul would have expected to see or wanted to see, right? And third, Jesus' disciples were willing to suffer and die for their preaching, which means
so Mike Lycona is giving the minimal facts for Christianity.
They probably weren't lying about it because liars make poor martyrs, don't they?
Mormonism has actually more facts than that. They have 4 facts. Joseph Smith taught from the beginning. He was translating from the plates. That shows clearly it's not a legend.
Yep.
Joseph Smith's 3 witnesses, Harris, Cowdery, and Whitmer, at the same time saw the angel Moroni and the golden plates. So it's not hallucinations.
Yeah, they said so.
Third, Joseph Smith and his followers are willing to suffer and endure martyrdom for their preaching. So that means they're not lying, right? And fourthly, Joseph Smith was an uneducated farm boy who could not have written the Book of Mormon on his own. That means it's not natural in origin. It's a miracle.
So just from this little bit of information, when we look at it purely through the eyes of scientific history, the only hypothesis that works well to explain the data is Jesus' resurrection.
I would say the only hypothesis that works well to explain the data of Mormonism is that the angel Moroni, Jesus and God the Father, did indeed appear to Joseph Smith, showed him where the golden plates were, and he translated the word of God to the people of the Americas. What other explanation could there be?
What other explanation could there be? Well, I know there's no God. I'm an atheist. I know there's no God. You know why? Because this is a great video and it only got 2.1K views. I mean, if there were a God with a true sense of justice, this would have gone viral. But of course, there is no God and life's not fair. But first of all, I want to say that I like Trent Horn. I think I've talked to both these guys. Yeah, he looks familiar. What's his name? I don't know his name. Sorry. Is his name down here? Transcript? No. Jacob. Of course it would be Jacob. Yeah, I've talked to him. I'm quite sure I have. And Trent. So this will be good. We'll start it from the beginning and we'll see how far we get. Q&A. By the way, I believe Mormonism is false and I believe Christianity, Catholicism is false. But by believing false things, you can actually get good results. Oh, this is going to really tick off some people. I shouldn't say it. Doug, stop saying it like this. Let me just say it this way. You can believe false things, but if the belief in those false things gives you a strong sense of identity, you can get very pragmatic results. And Mormons are some of the best people I've ever known. I live in Arizona. There's a lot of Mormons in Arizona. Same with Catholics, especially the conservative Catholics. I mean, great people. So just because you believe false things doesn't mean you can't have a great life. In fact, I would dare to say that you can live a better life than being a human secularist and an atheist by believing false things. Ooh. Shots fired.
If you want to direct a question to one of the debaters, feel free to put in a super. If and when that happens, both know what we have to Latter-day Saints.
I want to hear the structure.
The book describes itself. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
Good. Their prophets' teachings, their wars. 1827, Joseph Smith.
All right.
Inspired. Jacob, whenever it's members. All right. So since Jacob is taking the affirmative of is the Book of Mormon divinely inspired?
What's the structure?
Jacob, whenever you want to begin, you have 15 minutes to view.
Hang on a second.
Rather than doing lengthy introductions, you can check below to learn more about our debaters. The topic for the debate is the Book of Mormon divinely inspired? We're going to have opening statements of 15 minutes each, and then a rebuttal of 7 minutes each, a second rebuttal of 4 minutes each.
Boy, this puts the whole burden on Jacob.
We'll then have a cross-examination. Each debater will have 15 minutes, followed by audience Q&A. If you want to have your... Hang
on. So 15 minutes cross-examination each. So that's 30 minutes. I'm doing this so in case we want to shorten this up, we know where to go.
Is the Book of Mormon a rebuttal of 7 minutes? Have opening statements of 15 minutes each. And then
opening statements, 15 minutes. That's too long. That's too long, because all Jacob has to say is, hey, I've had the experience of the Holy Spirit of God in my heart, and therefore I know the Book of Mormon is true because God told me. And Trent can say the same. Although they'd say, but your personal experiences doesn't count and mine does. 15 minutes opening statement. So that means I can maybe skip the first 30 minutes. Do I want to hear their opening statements? I'm not so sure I do. I like the cross-examination.
And a rebuttal of 7 minutes each.
Oh, rebuttals are always good. So the first 30 minutes are opening statements, and then rebuttals will be another 15 minutes or 14 minutes, 7 minutes each. Let me say this too. The evidence for Mormonism is far, far superior than the evidence for Christianity. But this is a good thing for the Mormons, but also a bad thing. Because the bad thing is it's easier to poke holes when you got more things to poke holes into.
A second rebuttal of 4 minutes each. We'll then have a cross-examination. Each debater will have 15 minutes, followed by audience Q&A.
Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is, my apologies to Trent Horn and to Jacob. What's Jacob's last name? I don't know. I'm going to skip the opening statement. So that's Jacob's 15 minutes, and this looks like Trent's 15 minutes, and then we get into rebuttals. So right about here.
Mormon, but do not apply in any way to the Bible. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Trent. We now move into our first rebuttal. So, Jacob, you have 7 minutes whenever you'd like to start.
Okay. All right. So
it would have been nice if Matt Fradd did his hair for this debate.
It's kind of funny how he says...
I guess his makeup artist has vacation right now.
None of these arguments apply to the Bible. Like, he's talking about the lack of archaeology. I've noticed he didn't bring up anything about archaeology in the book of Exodus. In fact, the archaeological evidence related to the book of Exodus is abysmal. And even Jimmy Akin, a good friend of Trent, did an episode on it. You guys should watch it. It's pretty funny because he literally makes all the exact same arguments that you hear people make about the Book of Mormon when they're unsure about the archaeology. But there's a difference.
What Jacob just said is very true. This is called the outsider test for faith. When Christians, the traditional Christians like Protestants and Catholics, are talking to atheists, they sound, and when they're defending the Bible, they sound like Mormons defending the Book of Mormon. That's what Jacob's saying here.
We do know the location of where the Exodus took place. And so it's really odd to hear him have this double standard. The other thing is the Catholic argument. I mean, if I came to this debate and I said, Trent, or a Muslim, let's say, came to this debate and said, well, Islam is true, therefore anything that contradicts it must be false. That's the sort of reasoning that we're going with here. Like that just seems really below Trent's kind of caliber of argument.
Trent must have said something like, well, Catholicism is true, and so therefore Mormonism contradicts Catholicism, so therefore Mormonism is false.
Now, to get into a few of the different things, first of all, I want to ask a question. What has more archaeological evidence? The book of 1st Nephi in the Book of Mormon, or the book of Exodus in the Bible? I have brought up not just that Nahum had 3 letters in it that are correct. It's not just a name. They found Nahum, it was at the Eastern Trail,
Okay, this is good. I just started. But if there's Christians listening, now we're on the replay. Have you ever heard Christians defend the Old Testament by saying, hey, you know what they just found? They found Sodom and Gomorrah. They found the chariot wheels in this bottom of this place, river. And that shows that what happened in the Old Testament's true. You remember hearing stuff like this? Well, this is a Mormon using the same technique.
Eastern turn in the frankincense trail, just as the Book of Mormon describes. It's a burial grounds. They found a grave there from the 6th century with the name Ishmael. I'm not saying it's the Ishmael, but they did find one. And then directly east of there is a rare coastal oasis with a dozen specific features that align with it. To say that there's no archaeological evidence whatsoever for the Book of Mormon is just absurd, because can you imagine how excited Trent would be if we had that kind of archaeological evidence?
So the atheist response, and I guess even the Catholic response to this would be, well, sure, the Book of Mormon got some things right, but that doesn't mean the core propositions are true, right?
For the book of Exodus, or any of the first 5 books of the Bible for that matter, the entire Torah. Go look it up. It's funny, Trent's friend Jimmy Aiken said, quote, the absence of evidence for the book of Exodus is not necessarily evidence of absence. So that's the standard Trent holds to with the book of Exodus, but he doesn't hold that for the Book of Mormon. So let's move on let's talk a little bit about the plagiarism argument. Again, Jimmy helped me out on this one. Because people say, well, there's biblical quotes in there, so it must be a plagiarized book.
Great. I think I know where he's going with this. Well, there's Old Testament quotes in the New Testament, so it must be plagiarized, right?
Here's what Jimmy said about the plagiarism argument. He said, quote, this isn't a good argument. Ancient texts would borrow from each other, so it's something that you would expect in the ancient world.
Without citing
the fact that there are passages in the Bible, in fact, there are passages in the Bible that do exactly this. If you look at Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 through 4, it has exactly the same prophecy in the same words as Micah, verses 1 through 3. And Micah doesn't give credit to Isaiah.
Yeah, and same with Paul. Well, I think Paul and the author of Matthew give credit to, as spoken by the prophet so-and-so. But yeah, they definitely borrow quotes from the Old Testament.
Scholars have a name for this. They call it intertextuality. And we find it in the Bible, so I wouldn't criticize the Book of Mormon for it. So again, it just shows that Trent will allow for intertextuality in the Bible, but he won't in the Book of Mormon. The other thing is that Trent has a whole video about how translations are done, and he talks about the difference between a literal equivalence translation and a dynamic equivalence translation. In other words, the difference between translating idea for idea versus literal word for word. The Book of Mormon is clearly a dynamic translation of an ancient text into the King James English of the 19th century, utilizing the vocabulary available to Joseph Smith.
Yeah. And this is a problem, I think, for Mormons. Well, maybe not. But I kind of, whenever I see something more modern being translated and using the King James English, it's trying to give it some gravitas.
So when you have things like anachronisms, which do exist in the Bible.
Andrew Hamilton asked me an amazing, great question. PineCreek, not watching Kamala tonight? No. I'd rather watch a Mormon and a Catholic.
Bible, you come across things like this. The Bible in English talks about candlesticks, but candlesticks didn't exist in the first century Palestine. So there's a very reasonable explanation for this that Trent would talk about. It's called a translator's anachronism. Sometimes when doing a translation, you have to use more modern words or concepts that are familiar to your audience in order to convey the intended meaning.
That makes sense.
Trent will allow this for the Bible, but for some reason he won't consider it as a possibility for the Book of Mormon. But I guess...
But you understand why, Jacob, right? Is because the Bible, the New Testament especially, is Trent's favorite book. Your favorite book is the Book of Mormon.
It's probably because his...
And Jews' favorite book is the Torah, and the Muslims' favorite book is the Quran and the Hadiths.
Line of logic ultimately is the Catholic...
What's my favorite book? Myron, what's my favorite book? Crime and Punishment? No.
Church is true, therefore the Book of Mormon must be false, and he's unwilling to even question that assumption. So there is a difference between an actual anachronism and an apparent anachronism. What Trent didn't mention is that about 60 years ago, they made a big list of all these anachronisms. And they found that over the past 60 years, 70% of those have been shown not to be anachronisms. For example, cement in the ancient Americas, that was an anachronism until it wasn't. Beekeeping in the ancient Americas was an anachronism until it wasn't. Writing on plates itself was an anachronism until it wasn't.
I like this.
Barley was an anachronism, and Trent even had it in his book, but it actually isn't an anachronism. They found little barley. So remember, just because something is an apparent anachronism doesn't mean it's an actual anachronism.
And the stock market goes up until it doesn't.
And so when you consider both translators' anachronisms and apparent anachronisms, you can account for these things that seem out of place in the Book of Mormon. Let's talk real quick about Joseph Smith. First of all, it's funny. Trent says this about the Catholic Church. He says, if some members of the church fail in the moral life, that does not change if the church's teachings are true. Yeah. So he's going after Joseph Smith's character using kind of recycled gossip and things that...
Ooh, great point. So if you're a Christian, you say, well, but Joseph Smith was a con man. Well, King David was a murderer. King Solomon had like... 300 wives and 700 concubines, roughly. Was it 299? Says yeah, something like that. I mean, there's a lot of characters in the Bible that are severely flawed. So Joseph Smith can be severely flawed. It's different than Islam. Islam, I think. Well, Muslims say that Muhammad was pretty much perfect, but not God. But he was pretty up there. He was like me.
And assertions that aren't true. It'd be like me going to James White to find out about the history of the Catholic Church, right? He can dig into that rumor mill all he wants. Also, it's funny, he implies that Joseph Smith used his position in the church to get sex with more women. But for some reason, he doesn't apply that same standard to Abraham or Jacob or the many other biblical prophets that had more than one wife.
Good point.
Now, also, does Trent realize that St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas said that plural marriage can be justified in some circumstances?
Bazinga!
Also, here's some things you guys don't know about Joseph Smith, okay? First of all, there is a difference between a sealing and a marriage. Joseph was sealed to a lot of women, but guess how many children he had with women other than his wife Emma, who he by...
Actually, this is a great argument that Catholics can use if they ever cheat on their wives. I was sealed to her. It's not wrong. I was sealed to her. But you are my wife.
The way got pregnant 11 times.
No, it won't work.
0. No other woman besides Emma ever conceived. And they tried to find people that they thought were tied to Joseph Smith, and every time they find they were wrong. The reality is we don't know a lot about the nature of Joseph's sealings to these other women. But it's easy to dig into the root.
That's a nice euphemism. I didn't have sex with her. I had a sealing with her. What?
Rumor mill to try and go after Joseph to avoid talking about.
I apologize. I'm a joking guy, so if.
All right, Trent, whenever you're ready, you have 7 minutes.
No disrespect to either debater. I'm just having fun.
Look, even if Joseph Smith didn't write this book, that doesn't mean that God did it. The Book of Mormon is not so complex it has to be divine. There's about 350 names in the Book of Mormon. 1/3 of them are biblical names, like Ishmael, and another third are variants, like Nahum with an O instead of Nahum with a U in Scripture.
Sounds like Bachman.
When it comes to alleged Hebraisms in the text, well, that would make sense if it's trying to imitate the King James Bible, which is an English translation of originally Hebrew documents. But the Book of Mormon is weird because it's a 19th century translation that makes ancient Jews sound like 17th century Christians. And the King James English was not what was spoken in Joseph Smith's time. It's more rather he wants to make the Book of Mormon sound like the King James Bible. When it comes to the chiasms that Jacob brought up, those things come up in all kinds of literature, even Dr. Seuss.
For the people from South Dakota, what's a chiasm? It's like a literary technique of A, B, B, A. You know, the beginning and the ending are similar, and then it kind of crescendos and comes back down to where it belongs or where it started, that sort of thing. It's a literary device, and it's found in the Bible, it's found in the Quran. In fact, it's found so much in the Quran that some say that it has to be written by God, because no man can do these types of things perfectly like the Quran can.
Scholar Earl Wonderly has shown the most impressive chiasms, like Alma 36, they only exist if you cherry pick the text and ignore where it's not actually chiastic. And Smith didn't have to be literate. In fact, studies have shown that illiterate people have better memories. Think about all the phone numbers you used to know before you got a cell phone.
How many people here remember the phone number that you had when you were a child? Do I remember mine? 204-637. Oh. No, I don't remember.
A friend said that Joseph Smith's father had a tongue as smooth as oil. One witness said Joseph Smith could beat them all for tough stories. And Smith was acquainted with local Native Americans like Red Jacket or Handsome Lake that stirred his imagination for those people's connection to Christianity. We also keep in mind that Joseph Smith was a member of a juvenile debating society, and school children at that time could memorize things like the entire Gospel of Matthew in a few weeks, or give impromptu sermons that lasted for hours. And of course, 10% of the Book of Mormon are just copies of the Bible. Milman Perry has shown that
10%, he said? Just copies of the Bible? I think I went through the book of Mark once, and it was about 10% of Mark was just copies of the Old Testament through quotations of the Old Testament.
Slavic oral storytellers can recite epic poems over 300,000 words in length, longer than the Book of Mormon, I would say, in just a few weeks. So the Book of Mormon being recited in a few months is not impossible by human standards. Smith recited 4,000 words per day to scribes who wrote at a speed of about 10 words per minute, and we speak at about 150 words per minute. That's plenty of time to give a recitation, and the Book of Mormon is filled with stock phrases like behold or and it came to pass, as well as recycled story structures to help an oral presenter recite it. Moreover, unlike Christ or the apostles, Joseph Smith and Muhammad, anyone else, they didn't perform any verifiable miracles to authenticate their status as prophets. All we have is a book that allegedly no human being could create. And as I said, even if it wasn't Smith, maybe it could be someone else. We haven't been shown that only God could have been responsible for this book or the Quran or any similar kind of book.
Interesting question I would ask Trent is if the Book of Mormon did have a claim to a miracle that Joseph Smith did, would you then believe it? I don't think you would.
Coming into existence. And the argument, well, by their fruits we know them. Well, that could also apply to the Quran. People say the Quran makes Muslims pray 5 times a day, and they have wonderful communities and exhibit all these moral fruits. And the same argument could...
Yeah, Islam is better than Christianity because the Muslims pray 5 times a day, but the Christians have to pray without ceasing. It's very tiresome.
Go against Catholicism. I could say, not against, but I could say, look, Catholicism must be true. Early Mormon teachers interpreted the Book of Mormon's references to the great and abominable church in the Book of Mormon. They referenced that to being the Catholic Church. But how could the Catholic Church be great and abominable or be false if it's produced so many great saints throughout history? We can't compare fruit versus fruit. Mormons are very nice people. Jacob's the nicest person I've debated, especially recently.
I'm hurt. I need the Enya music, Byron. He's debated me. I thought I was the nicest person.
But we can't compare fruit versus fruit. We have to compare evidence versus evidence. So what about these alleged witnesses to the Book of Mormon?
Alleged?
All we have are 8 people who allegedly saw golden plates under cloth, saw...
All we have is 8 people? I think that's 7 more than what you have, Trent. The Mormons are going, yay, PineCreek.
some kind of artifact, whether it was true or not. And we have 3
Whoa, he has
witnesses
actual plates.
who claimed to have seen an angel. Though all we have is their handwriting over a state. We have signatures of their names written in Oliver Cowdery's writing, by the way, not their own signatures to these testimonies. But look at these witnesses. The 3 witnesses.
Really? I didn't know that. Cowdery signed for other people? Is that true, Mormons? Is that true? I don't think so.
Are David Whitmer, Martin Harris, and Oliver Cowdery. Let's start with David Whitmer. He later left the Mormon church, and he said in an address to all Christians, "God spake to me again by his own voice from the heavens, and told me to separate myself from among Latter-day Saints." If I found out one of the apostles left Jesus after his resurrection, I'd be very nervous to hear that, but none of them did that. So
you'd be very nervous to hear that. But would you leave Christianity if that was recorded in the New Testament? Like, couldn't you just give an explanation that Satan tempted one of the apostles to leave, one of the disciples to leave? And that, you just trust God that they'll come back someday? And if they didn't come back, then they weren't a true disciple to begin with. And for morally sufficient reasons, God allowed that.
There's a difference between the Bible and Mormonism. Second, there's Oliver Cowdery. He was a cousin of Joseph Smith. He was involved beforehand. He knew Smith.
James was the brother of Jesus.
He claimed to have seen visions before he met Smith, and he also claimed that dowsing rods could speak to him. He also lived in the same city as Ethan Smith, the author of View of the Hebrews.
Really? The dowsing? Aren't those rods they used to find water? Is that what he's talking about?
May have served as a source for the Book of Mormon. Finally, there's Martin Harris, one of the primary translators. Harris mortgaged his farm to fund the publishing of the Book of Mormon, which means he had a huge financial motivation to convince people of its truthfulness.
Huge financial. That makes sense. Like, there's a motive there for lying, maybe. But maybe some could say that Paul had the same motive. No. Please don't send me any more money, says Paul. Please don't send me more money. I'm not doing this for the money. But remember Paul talk like that?
Multiple sources say, though, he was incredibly superstitious. In 1842, John...
I'm sorry, Trent, but when I hear a Roman Catholic accuse another group of people of being superstitious, I cough.
Clark said of Martin Harris, Harris was ready to be duped by anything. No matter where he went, he saw visions.
Like, Roman Catholics think that in the church where they have mass, that there's certain pieces of wood that are holy, consecrated to be holy. There's Catholics who kneel down in front of a picture or sculpture of Mary and Jesus and pray to it. And there's Catholics that have these little beads and rub them or something and say incantations. Sure sounds superstitious to me.
And supernatural appearances. One time he said he met the Lord Jesus Christ, who walked by the side of him in the shape of a deer for 2 or 3 miles, talking with him as familiarly as one talks with another.
Talking to deer? I'm trying to remember all the talking animals in the Old Testament. I know there was a donkey. In Genesis there was a serpent that some say was a snake. Talking snakes, talking donkeys, talking bushes, burning bush.
Harris also admitted he only saw the plates with spiritual eyes, and some people left the church as a result of that. And Harris himself would say things that are contradictory, that he says, yes, I saw this like you see me, but he also said, I saw the golden plates just as distinctly as I see anything around me. though at the time they were covered over with a cloth. Early Mormons were part of a magical worldview that believed in things like second sight.
Oh, magical worldview. See, I think Catholics can appreciate this, and I think Mormons can appreciate this. When an atheist hears a Catholic talk about a Mormon and use the word magical, we think there's a certain word that pops in our head. Irony.
So seeing things with a spiritual eye or a natural eye was sometimes seen as being the same thing. And we also have the other witnesses talking about only having seen it in a vision. David Whitmer said that the angel was something he did not see. It was an impression that he felt.
Thanks,
so going forward, there's no conclusive proof that any of them saw something supernatural. Rather, they were primed to see or feel an angel when Joseph Smith prophesied it while translating and moved them to do that. As for the plates, in 1843, brass plates were unearthed in Kinderhook, Illinois. Smith claimed that they referred to an Egyptian descendant of Ham, but a blacksmith made them. They were a hoax. In 1845, James Strang, an early Mormon dissenter, claimed to have translated metal plates.
By the way, right now, what Trent Horn is doing is he's giving naturalistic explanations for claims in Mormonism.
And non-Mormons confirmed they existed, which never happened for the Book of Mormon. Martin Harris, one of the original Book of Mormon witnesses, left the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, left Joseph Smith's church, and became one of Strang's followers for a brief period. Jacob doesn't believe in James Strang's plates, he doesn't believe in the Kinderhook plates, and I don't believe in Joseph Smith's plates. And I'll address the other objections that Jacob raised.
You know, a Mormon or an atheist like myself can talk about various claims of resurrections. I don't believe in that resurrection, I don't believe in that resurrection, and I don't believe in Jesus' resurrection.
In my next rebuttal.
All right, thank you very much. We're now moving into second rebuttals of 4 minutes each. Jacob, whenever you want to begin.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I'll just read a couple of quotes about the character of these witnesses. Let's talk for a minute about Martin Harris. E.B. Grandin said that Martin Harris was among the early settlers of Palmyra. He has ever borne the character of an honorable and upright man, and obliging and benevolent neighbor, had secured to himself by honest integrity a respectable fortune. He has left a large circle of acquaintances and friends to pity his delusion. In other words, what E.B. Grandin was saying is that he was a super awesome guy, so we're kind of in shock that he ended up following this. This is actually a hostile witness who's testifying to his character. The reality is that all of these quotes, if
Do we have that for Paul?
you actually look up the sources on them, they're all from people who hated Joseph in the church. And so they were out being the ones saying this. But when you actually look at the people who knew these witnesses, you find a totally different story. I highly recommend Richard Anderson's book on the witnesses. The same thing can be said about Oliver Cowdery.
Yeah, see, this is what I was saying earlier about the evidence for Mormonism is far, far superior to the evidence for Christianity. Like, we don't have the backstory of Paul, other than what Paul said. But we don't have people who liked Paul or even hated Paul talking about Paul at age 15, 20, 30. We don't even know how old Paul was, right? We know very little about Paul other than what he has said in the New Testament. We have no sources outside that.
The Ohio...
This is why people like Robert Price say that Paul's not who you think he is.
House of Representatives, John Breslin, he said of him, Mr. Cowdery was a citizen that none could have been more esteemed. His honesty, integrity, and industry were worthy of the imitation of all. All of the sources you will hear from the other people, these are all antagonistic, hateful witnesses to the church. So, and also saying they only saw it under a cloth, that just shows that Trent does not know what he's talking about. They very clearly talked about it in the statements themselves that are in the Book of Mormon. You can see that they say that they handled the plates, they looked at the characters like they were fully involved in it. But I am glad we're making progress here, because Trent is recognizing that Joseph must have been some sort of a genius storyteller with an incredible imagination, but that's all just speculation. His own mother also said, which he didn't bring this up, that Joseph...
He's saying that the things Trent's saying is just all speculation. I just had a flashback, because when I debated Trent Horn and I gave naturalistic explanations for the resurrection, Trent, I think, said the exact same thing. He said, Doug, that's just all speculation. Interesting.
Inclined to read books than any of her other children. Okay? Joseph's own wife, these are people who knew him best, said Joseph couldn't even write a well-worded letter. And if you go read the actual letters written by Joseph Smith, you very quickly learn that this was not a highly literate and educated man.
But maybe Joseph Smith used the money from the guy who mortgaged his house to hire people to write it for him, right?
Everyone thought that Joseph Smith was a doofus. Even his mom and his, and at least in educational wise, and the neighbors, like nobody disagreed. That's one of the reasons that people were so amazed by the Book of Mormon, especially those closest to him who knew him. I am glad though that he did come up with the idea that he, after hearing all the evidence that I presented, that, well, maybe Joseph didn't actually write this. Maybe someone else did. Well, then who? Trent needs to come up with a plausible theory for where this book came from. We have the book, and the book is contrary to what he says. It's incredible. The thing is, the people like who just read on kind of a surface level, it sounds just like the atheists who read the Bible on a surface level, and they're like, "This is a bunch of superstitious, weirdo nonsense from a Stone Age group of people."
He's talking about me.
Okay, that's the kind of people that Trent is quoting here. Okay, but people who actually study it deeply, like Harold Bloom, who's an atheist, is like, this guy's a genius. We got Pulitzer Prize winners saying that this book is among the greatest works of American literature. You can say a lot of things about the Book of Mormon. You can't say that it's simple or dumb. And it's hilarious because Trent brought up "and it came to pass" as some problem when he doesn't.
Maybe Joseph Smith and his friends paid someone to be a ghostwriter, or many people to be ghostwriters. Say, here's money, but don't tell anybody you wrote this or copied this or whatever you did.
Realizes "and it came to pass" is actually a Hebraism, because Hebrew didn't have punctuation, and so what they would do is they would use phrases like "and it came to pass" in order to break up different things. Those are you're right, they are in the Bible, and they usually are in historical narratives in the Bible, and the Bible in the King James Version has a lot of those actually taken out because they became so redundant. So the redundancy of that phrase is actually evidence of its Hebrew origins. Also, the fruits of Islam, I'm sorry, go and visit Muslim majority countries. The fruits of Islam are not comparable to the fruits of what Joseph has produced amongst the Latter-day Saints.
Well, be careful here, Jacob. Be careful. You go to Muslim countries. I know what he's getting at, and I generally agree. But their culture is completely different. And if you were to have your car, if you drive somewhere, in a Muslim country, you don't have to lock it. Because anybody who steals there, in some places, they get their hands chopped off. Go to California and try to park anywhere and don't lock it. What will happen? Talking about fruits of how people behave. So there's something to Islam. The fear that Sharia law provides has some positive benefits.
Also, he brought up the lost 116 pages. Well, here's a problem. If Joseph had a manuscript somehow...
That's time.
Oh, that's time?
You can wrap up your sentence.
Okay, well, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. We are now going to take a very short break, and then when we come...
I get a second.
He gets another,
I am sorry.
He gets another one.
You have 4 minutes whenever you're ready.
Matt Fradd looks like he just got up. He's like, oh yeah, I forgot we're debating today.
Right. All right, so remember that Jacob is the one who has the burden of showing the Book of Mormon is divinely inspired. I do not have the burden of proving who exactly wrote it or who didn't. He is the one who is trying to prove that God must have been involved in the creation of this book.
Translation is Jacob has all the work, and I can sit back and relax.
And I am saying he has not met that level of proof at all. So the evidence that he's given us, he said, oh, you're only quoting people that hate the church. That's not true. When David Whitmer said that he left the Mormon faith and he wanted to have nothing to do with it, and God told him that, that's Whitmer's own words that I'm quoting. Or when I'm quoting Martin Harris, I'm quoting a interview Harris gave in 1859. I'm quoting the actual people's words. And yes, people did say Harris and Cowdery were honest or good people. but you can be honest and be incredibly superstitious. And my point about Harris was that he was a visionary fanatic, is what people described of him. Someone who saw spooks and the supernatural.
You mean like someone seeing Jesus on the Damascus Road? That type of vision? That type of spookiness? Going blind?
Around every corner that he turned, and was primed to see things that weren't there. So we have not been given good evidence that only God could have inspired this based on the witnesses that are involved, rather than Joseph Smith himself or any other story.
What's the evidence that only God could have inspired the New Testament? Prophecy?
Teller. Now, when it comes to Smith's ability to create a book, no, he wasn't good necessarily at writing, but you don't have to be a good writer to be a good storyteller. You can dictate things. For example, read History of the Church, dictated by Joseph Smith. It's a good history of his church, and he dictated it to scribes. We don't see a bumbling, illiterate person there. Why couldn't he dictate other things as well? When I brought up the plural marriages, I didn't just bring up I didn't bring up sex, by the way. Jacob did. I just brought up the fact that he got multiple wives, which many false prophets have done throughout history.
That's good what Trent did. I didn't bring up sex. This Mormon guy brought up sex. That tells you what he's thinking about. Clever.
But what I did bring up was that it really makes us question his honesty. And the people I brought up, I wasn't quoting lurid anti-Mormons. I quoted FAIR, a well-known Mormon apologetics organization, admitting that, yes, Joseph wasn't entirely honest with his wife, that he had already been sealed to other women and then resealed to them, but didn't tell his wife. This impugns his honesty. Oliver Cowdery himself, in a letter to his own brother, described Joseph's sealing with Fanny Alger, a 16-year-old housekeeper, as a dirty, nasty affair.
I wonder how many women back then, when Joseph Smith approached them and said, "Hey, God told me I'm sealed to you. We can have sex." I wonder how many women said, "No, I don't believe you." Maybe they did what I do, and they said, "Okay, if God really told you that I should have sex with you, I'm going to soak this my kerchief in water, and you pray to God to light it on fire. And if it lights on fire, then you can have coitus with me."
Wasn't an enemy. That's Cowdery. Though Cowdery was excommunicated, all the witnesses were excommunicated. He came back to the church for just a few months, though, before he ended up dying. One of the greatest works of American literature. Have you read it? Do most professors have they read it? Do you know any? If you're a non-Mormon, do you know any stories from the Book of Mormon? If you're a non-Christian, do you know stories from the Bible? I bet you do. That should make you really question.
Argument from popularity. 2 minutes in the penalty box, Trent.
If it's one of the greatest works of American literature. When it comes to the argument from plagiarism, my point wasn't that merely there's plagiarism. My point was that the ancient authors who lived in 4th century America were quoting from things like Paul's letter to the Corinthians that they would not have had access to because they're descendants of people who left the old world in 600 BC. It's not just plagiarism. It's that they were plagiarizing from things they could not have possibly known about, like 1 Corinthians or Alma 32's plagiarism of the letter to the Hebrews. And they couldn't have known about that, but Joseph Smith could have because he's responsible for coming up with the entire story or whatever the argument may be. So the arguments weren't refuted. The zero archaeological evidence. Notice so far, Jacob has not disputed my point about the New World. This isn't like a few thousand people fleeing Egypt with disposable goods that might disappear in the desert. We're talking about over 1,000 years, hundreds of thousands of people building huge settlements, engaging in warfare with chariots and iron, all sorts of things in the New World. And Jacob has not disputed my point that there is zero archaeological evidence for that, which should give us good thinking that it didn't happen.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't that apply to the Jews leaving Egypt as well? There's you would expect certain things and you don't find them.
And finally, as for the Catholic argument, it is not below my caliber. Both Jacob and I can confidently say the Quran is wrong about Jesus not being crucified because Christianity is true. And because Catholicism is true, Mormonism is false.
All right.
Yeah, but I could just say, well, Jesus he was crucified, but he didn't rise from the dead because atheism is true. That's not a very powerful argument, is it?
Right. So now we're going to have a quick break and come back for a cross-examination, 15 minutes each, and then Q&A.
Is like combinations of ancient names, for example.
What is that supposed to be? Is that supposed to be Richard Dawkins? Oh yeah, it is. And Aquinas? That's funny.
This power.
Like, so you're going to take the first 15 minutes. That means you are free to ask him questions, to direct the conversation wherever you want it to go, to even interrupt him if he's filibustering or being boring.
This is the fight.
And that's not being rude. That's just part of the cross-examination, right? And then the same thing will happen for you. You're welcome to interrupt him, to interject, to lead the conversation wherever. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
That's good.
Wait a minute. Where's the mouth guards?
I know these are usually the most exciting parts of the debates, but I think it's really
Where's
great
the
that both
helmets?
of you had some time to lay out your main arguments. So, whenever you want, Jacob, 15 minutes.
Okay, let's get started. So Trent, why does the Book of Mormon, published in 1830, correctly predict that King Zedekiah had a son named Mulek, if we didn't know that until the 20th century?
What people have discovered is that he had a son, his name was Mulekayu. It's not exactly Mulek. So there's a lot of things happen there where the Book of Mormon will create names, usually portmanteaus, like combinations of ancient names, for example, and they tend to line up with that. I'm sure you could probably do
know
something
that? Do you know the shortened version of that name is Mulek?
possible, yeah.
Okay. So next, why does the Book of Mormon have over a dozen authentic Hebrew names that were not discovered until long after Joseph Smith's death?
Well, Joseph Smith did have access to things like Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. There was also...
What's your source on that?
That's what scholars recognize. That was something that had already been translated. That
yeah, but do you have any evidence that Joseph actually had that book?
I don't need to have access I don't need to have evidence that he possessed it, but if it's something that he could access within his own New York library.
This is so good. Right now, Jacob is being Trent, and Trent is being me. When we had this cross-examination, Trent would ask me things like, "Well, do you have?" I give an explanation, and Trent goes, "Well, do you have any evidence of this?" And I very quickly said, "No, but it seems reasonable to me."
Or, for example, things like the Book of Enoch were all in 1825 in New York.
Okay, that's a separate subject.
No, but it's extra
that wasn't the
biblical.
question I asked. Okay,
it's pseudegraphical Jewish literature that has names in it that was available in the time and place.
Jacob
and you have no evidence that
Trent.
Joseph had any of that, right?
He lived in a context where it's available.
Okay, all right.
And if you throw
Do you concede the existence of chiasmus literary form in the Book of Mormon?
The chiasm is something that appears in all kinds of literature.
Really,
Sure.
17 item chiasms, regularly appear?
Yes,
You were
Trent.
talking about the chiasm in Alma 36.
Alma 36, yeah.
Alma 36. And as I quoted other scholars like Earl Wonderly, who are skeptical that it is a chiastic structure, that you only get that by cherry picking the data.
It kind of sounds. Do you think you might have a bias against Mormonism?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it's actually published.
Of course, you have a bias against Mormonism, Trent. You think Mormonism is false and Catholicism is true.
Dialogue, the Journal of Mormon Thought.
But the way Trent should answer this is yes. Well, next question.
Why does the Book of Mormon correctly predict over a dozen specific characteristics of a 20-mile stretch of coastline in the Dhofar region of Oman?
Because even if I couldn't answer that question, that wouldn't prove that the book is divinely inspired. But just predicting things like roads go east or west, or that they'll have certain things that are similar to other elements in the desert or in the Old Testament, that's not very impressive.
Do you believe that the devil is pleased when people read the Book of Mormon?
Do I believe the devil is pleased when they read it? I don't know. If someone reads it and comes to see that it's meandering, that it's false, like I'm not afraid of people choosing.
Let me quote a verse from it.
Would you like me to finish my answer?
Well,
Blake asks, "What side are you on, Doug?" I am on both their sides because I'm an atheist. To me, this is great fun. Sorry, Trent, for the pause there. Because this is a great outsider test for faith. Every atheist on the planet who is interested in this sort of thing smiles when they hear this, because they are talking to each other the same way an atheist would talk to a Mormon or a Catholic would talk to an atheist. It's the same arguments, but now we have two theists going at it. So it's great entertainment. This is better than going to Century Theaters and watching a movie.
I think it's kind of filibustering. I'm just going to read a verse from the Book of Mormon.
It was about 8 seconds, but all right.
That which is, this is from the Moroni 7. It says, that which is evil cometh of the devil, for the devil is an enemy unto God, and inviteth and enticeth to sin, and to do that which is evil. But behold, everything which inviteth and enticeth to do good, and to love God, and to serve him, is inspired of God.
Like, just get rid of the ifs. If that enticeth. Just say entices.
For I show unto you the way to judge, for everything which persuadeth to believe in Christ is sent forth by the gift and power of Christ. Does leading people towards Christ in order to serve God sound like the kind of thing that the devil wants people to do?
I could say the same thing about the Whitmerites, the Shakers, all other kinds of 19th century
Mennonites.
restorationist cults that make very similar claims to Mormons, but Mormons reject, that also try to lead people to Christ. So if it works for the Whitmerites and the Shakers, it doesn't work for the Book of Mormon.
Is the devil the one that's causing Latter-day Saint temple marriages to be 3 to 5 times less likely to end in divorce?
No, it could just be basic elements of natural law that if you have very strong core values, your marriages tend to last long. Many arranged marriages and non-Christian...
And do Latter-day Saints...
Can I finish
do
my
they
thought,
get their
please?
values from the Book of Mormon?
Do they get their... I'm sure that some of them do, but as I said, in non-Christian...
This is exactly what I was saying earlier. That you can believe in false things and have good results.
In non-Christian parts of the world, arranged marriages last very long, but that doesn't prove those Buddhist or Hindu cultures are true in their religious beliefs.
Okay. Is it the devil that's causing Latter-day Saints to give 7 times more volunteer service than your average American?
No, it's just a wonderful, robust tithing program. So I am envious of that. Yeah, you've got which Bible itself doesn't command tithing, though.
Okay. Is it the devil that's causing Latter-day Saints to know their Bibles better than better than every other major Christian group in the United States?
I'm sure they know it well. I know Jehovah's Witnesses that also know the Bible backwards.
Yeah, and I'd say most atheists, not most, a lot of atheists know the Bible better than a lot of Christians.
And forward. But as St. Jerome said, it's not the letter of Scripture that matters, but its meaning. That's where Mormons fall flat.
Got it. Why is it reasonable to believe that the book of Exodus is inspired of God?
Ooh.
Because Jesus thought that it was, and his church says that it is.
Okay. So what is the... you have said that the most important evidence for the resurrection would be the claims that Jesus appeared in bodily form to groups of his disciples. So the most important evidence for the resurrection, and therefore Christianity and the Catholic Church, is the witness testimony of Jesus Christ's resurrection. Is that correct?
Correct. Not all witness testimony is equal, though.
Okay. How many specific eyewitnesses left extant written accounts of the resurrection?
We would say...
I know the answer.
You mean first-person accounts of it?
It's eyewitnesses who left extant written first-hand accounts of the resurrection.
Well, of the moment of the resurrection or the post-resurrection appearances?
The moment of the resurrection.
The moment of the resurrection happened in the tomb and nobody was around, but that's inferred by seeing Christ post-resurrection.
Let's include post-resurrection.
Okay.
How many written extant accounts do we have?
From an eyewitness?
Yes.
Well, if you believe that it was John the Apostle, that would be one.
Do the majority of scholars conclude the Gospel of John was written by John?
Scholars don't, no. But the most important ones we have Paul's letter to the Corinthians.
That's one.
That records the appearances, and Paul had firsthand contact with those who
In a
had
vision,
those appearances.
correct?
In a vision.
No, he doesn't call it a vision.
Well,
So it isn't a visionary experience. He said he wasn't sure if he was
just
in
like
the
an
body or
atheist.
out of the body.
He's talking about his appearance in the heavens,
just
and he
like me.
specifically says there, I do not know if it was in the body or out of the body, but he uses a Greek word, orao, that just means appeared, to see.
yeah, for Christians, I don't know if you fully comprehend what's going on here. But this Mormon's like going, douche, douche. This is a great question. How many eyewitness accounts? And I've asked this question many times to many people. But the answer is 1. If you define eyewitness accounts as someone's identifying themselves in the first person and saying what they saw. I saw this. That's an eyewitness account. Not, he saw this. That's not an eyewitness account. And all the Gospels are of the sort that don't say, I saw this. But except for Paul. And Revelation chapter 1. When it comes to the resurrection. The epistles, Peter and James and a few other places do say, I, a servant of God, but they don't talk about the resurrection. It's inferred, but they don't actually come out and say, I saw Jesus resurrect. Peter never said that.
And he says in 1 Corinthians, have I not seen the Lord. He speaks about it in a normal way, which is very different from the Book of Mormon witnesses that repeatedly say they saw it in a vision or a trance and say things like that.
So how many total people left first-hand eyewitness accounts of the resurrection? Can you give me a number? I just want a number.
That they saw the resurrected Jesus.
Is it more than 3?
Trent, you know
I
what
wouldn't
he's
say
asking.
that it's probably not more than 3, but
Okay,
I would rather have
Who are the 3?
reliable second-hand
that's fine.
accounts in the New Testament than the unreliable ones for the Book of Mormon.
So you
Who are
have
the 3?
3 maybe accounts, but how many people left first-hand accounts of the gold plates? Like, give me a number.
left first-hand accounts.
Yeah. How many people left first-hand accounts that they had seen the gold
This is
plates?
so good.
That they had seen the plates.
Yes.
I don't know, there could be about a dozen people who said they saw something like this, but that doesn't mean that it's a divinely inspired artifact.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to the witnesses, the 3 witnesses and the 8 witnesses, technically we only have signatures to statements, all of which were written by Oliver Cowdery.
Okay, so
none of the men actually
quick,
signed it themselves.
But here's the thing: that was just Cowdery. They all testified later in their life that they had seen the gold plates. Outside of what Cowdery wrote, Cowdery was just providing the printer's manuscript to actually publish it.
Okay.
So that's
For the people in Nebraska, what's going on here? This is an eyewitness off. This is a competition about eyewitnesses. And in case you're not understanding what's going on here, the Mormon's winning because the Mormon has more first-hand eyewitness accounts for the golden plates than the Christian does of eyewitness accounts for Jesus' resurrection. And you can say, but these are bad eyewitness accounts, or I don't trust these eyewitness accounts. You can blab and blab and blab about that. But the fact still remains. There are more first-hand eyewitness accounts of people saying, I saw this, than what the New Testament has. Sometimes the truth hurts.
It's just a bad argument. The other thing, but here's the thing, though. You have here's a first-hand eyewitness statement from David Whitmer shortly before his death in 1887. He said, quote, I wish now, standing as it were in the very sunset of life and in the fear of God, for once and all to make this public statement, that I have never in any time denied my testimony or any part thereof, which has so long been published in the Book of Mormon. I also testify to the world that neither Oliver Cowdery nor Martin Harris at ever time denied their testimony.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. But he just said that because he knew he was going to die soon, and he wanted to make sure he didn't go to hell. But Mormons don't have this concept of eternal conscious torment like the Christians, like the Catholics do. So it wasn't this big fear thing.
Both died reaffirming the truth of the divine authenticity of the Book of Mormon. Oliver's last words to me were, quote, Brother David, be true to your testimony of the Book of Mormon. Okay? Now, do you have any extant, first-hand, signed statements like this for the resurrection? Yes or no?
No, we don't have that.
Okay. Why would
Excellent.
David Whitmer...
I wish I had an applause button. That's the way to answer a question like that. Tell the truth. You don't have it.
make a statement like that after leaving the church and believing that Joseph Smith was a false prophet?
He made that statement because he had given a previous interview where he said, as I quoted, where he said that the angel, he did not see the appearance or shape of the angel, he felt an impression. And then when that caused an outcry, he clarified that. But what's interesting
what's the source of that quote that you just gave?
He was giving an interview with, here, I can bring it up here if you like. Let's see. But I do know he also said in his own word, address to all Christians, he said that God spoke to me again by his own voice and told me to separate myself from the Latter-day Saints.
So it's true that David Whitmer did have a falling out with Joseph Smith over the failure of a financial failure that happened, and he felt that Joseph should have known better, but he never denied his testimony.
It was an interview with John Murphy dated in 1880 when Whitmer said that. And then later he clarified it.
So John, did you know that the statement I just read was in response to what Murphy had claimed that he had said? He said that David Whitmer actually came out and said, Murphy is lying. I didn't say that.
No, he said that he never denied. He said that
You're
he
just
never.
unfamiliar
No,
with it.
he said that he never denied his testimony, but his testimony is that he felt an impression of the angel, not that he beheld it. He never denied that part. He just said, "I never denied my testimony."
Here's a quote
but
from
Mormon testimonies
so what do you think
conflate
of,
the
I want to ask you
natural
what you think of
and
this.
spiritual eye.
So David Whitmer said this. Someone accused him of being hallucinating. He said, "No, sir, I was not under any hallucination, nor was I deceived. I saw with these eyes, I heard with these ears. I know of which I speak. Everything was as natural to us as it is at any time." In other words, the
See, this is amazing to me because I don't believe Mormonism is true. Not a chance. Very, very tiny chance. Christianity has nothing like that. Jacob picks up a piece of paper, quotes this guy. I saw with these eyes, these ears. Well, I guess you can say Paul. No, even Paul doesn't say it like that. Yeah, this is what I meant. The evidence for Mormonism is far superior than the evidence for Christianity.
it's simply you're relying on sources. I want everyone to know this. He's relying on sources that are enemies of the church that wanted to try and make it seem like they had contradicted their testimony. Now, to go on, do you think it's plausible that Joseph Smith did indeed have plates of some kind, some sort of a metal object?
Yeah, similar to how the Kinderhook plates existed.
So you think it's plausible?
Can I finish? Similar to how the Kinderhook plates existed and those
Jacob,
were
I'd say
hoax,
no.
or
You
James
answered the question.
Strang had the Voree plates.
Did the
he
Voree-
could have had plates like that.
Okay, so first of all, Joseph, all of those things are hearsay accounts of what people said that Joseph said. Okay, you have no statement from Joseph Smith saying that he had confirmed that any of those things were
It
ever
was his
legitimate.
own scribe who said that he invested. William Clayton, it was his own scribe who
hand
said
out,
that he
Jacob.
saw that.
Someone said that he said. These are secondhand accounts. Now, you said that you think it's plausible that he did. My question is, why is it more likely than not? That's what plausible means. Why is it more likely than not that Joseph had
First,
those
let me be
plates?
clear, those plates existed. You're referencing whether Joseph Smith attempted to translate the Kinderhook plates. Your original question was, do I think that there were plates? There certainly could have been, just like there were the Kinderhook plates
No,
and
I'm
the
asking
Voree
if it's
plates.
plausible. Do you think it's plausible, more likely than not, that Joseph had metal plates of some kind?
I think it's plausible he had some kind of an object.
Why?
That was off. People often testified
Why?
there were people said they saw an object.
So the
with
witnesses,
cloth over.
you think that the witnesses are reliable to say that it is reliable that he had something. You just deny that what he had actually contained the plates.
No, I deny that what he had were 550 pages worth of information transcribed onto 40 golden plates in a language called Reformed Egyptian that never existed in the history of the world.
So you don't.
Yeah, see, this is interesting. Trent admits that, yeah, there could be some physical objects, some metal, some plates, but that doesn't mean that they're, God's word translated through the angel. Trent Horn sounds exactly like me when I'm critiquing Christianity. Sure, people back then could have seen something. Yeah, sure, Jesus could have said this and done that, but that doesn't mean like he actually walked on water.
You don't have there were never any statements of exactly how many plates that there were. And also, if you're going to say that he forged metal plates, do you have any evidence that he forged metal plates? Is there anything in the historical record showing that he actually had the ability to do that, the resources, any of it?
No, but that's not my job to prove whether he did or didn't do that. The fact is there are many different hypotheses. And so if we have one hypothesis that God preserved...
You know what I just thought of? I could splice Trent's answers here onto the debate we had. So he asked me a question, and I swear, some of my answers sound just like Trent's, but I could have him answer for me.
Plates that actually have information that couldn't have been contained on them in a language that didn't exist, or there were artifacts similar to other fake metal artifacts that did exist at the time. That seems more likely to me.
Okay, so why did Oliver Cowdery say the following on his deathbed? It was no dream, no vain imagination of the mind, it was real.
Because the early Mormons at that time, you could read Michael Quinn's book, Mormonism and the Magical Worldview. What they say is whether something is real is something where the natural eye and the spiritual eye come together. So, for example, in the testimony of the three witnesses, it says that they saw the plates by the power of God, which is weird because I can see. Let me finish. I can see these without the power of God. That makes me seem like it's something a bit more visionary.
Did the 8 witnesses say that they saw it by the power of God?
I'd have to go back to their testimony of it.
Okay, John Whitmer was one of the 8 witnesses, and before his death, he was asked the following question about the rumor that they had only seen it under a cloth or in a vision. A newspaper article asked John Whitmer directly. He said, quote, he asked him, did you see it under the plates? And John said, quote, no, Joseph handed them uncovered into our hands, and we turned the leaves sufficient to satisfy us. Why should we believe you over the actual witnesses?
You wouldn't have to disbelieve me. There could be plates like Kinderhook of Ori that you turn and you look at, but they're not actually.
See, if I were Trent right now, I would say they were just lying. Isn't that more plausible? Jacob? Isn't that more plausible than a God coming down, an angel coming down and doing all this translation stuff on a plate? I mean, just go with lie. And then you get to the martyrdom and all that sort of thing. Why would they do this? Why would they lie?
But you have no evidence of Joseph committing metallurgical fraud.
No, I don't need that because there were other people committing metallurgical fraud. And just like you have no evidence that they contain a reformed Egyptian writing or had any of these documents on them, it could have been someone else, or he could have done that through someone else. I don't have to provide a complete alternative account. All I have to say is that this miraculous account is severely lacking in evidence.
They risk their
life? Trent Horn sounds exactly like me.
All I have to say is that this miraculous account is severely lacking in evidence and contradicting evidence.
Did they risk their lives?
Oh yeah, I gotta splice this. Because he's giving PineCreek Doug's argument against Christianity, but he's just using it against Mormonism.
To keep those testimonies, to say those things?
Who, Joseph Smith?
Those witnesses.
Well, I know that Joseph Smith was certainly risking his life because the Illinois authorities were certainly.
What about the extermination order on Mormons in Missouri?
Can I finish? Well, here's the issue. Many religious people risk their lives living out their faith. So we're talking about the original witnesses here. And whether someone risks their life shows evidence of their sincerity or at least their commitment. And I will say that Joseph Smith was certainly committed to try to keep this going, hopefully at least to maybe, till his presidential election was over.
So that's time. And so, Trent, you can begin with 15 minutes whenever you're ready.
All right.
Take your time.
Okay, let me see here.
I think what Trent should do is wave the white flag.
Okay, so let's talk about a few areas that I brought up. I want to talk about Book of Mormon geography. Do scholars, secular and religious, agree that the events in the Gospels took place within the area we now call modern-day Israel and Palestine?
Yes.
Okay. Do Mormon scholars agree on an area of similar size being the location of where the events of the Book of Mormon took place in the New World?
Yes, I would say that most of the reputable scholars in the Latter-day Saint community lean towards it happening in the Mesoamerica area.
So you believe a Mormon scholar that defends the Heartland model and says it took place around the Great Lakes is not a reputable scholar?
Not in my opinion. Well, I don't find their arguments compelling.
Are they reputable scholars?
Depends on the scholar.
Could there be some?
Possibly, but I mean, there's reputable scholars that believe kind of things that are really weird and out there.
Alrighty. While artifacts like the name of Israel being found on the Merneptah stele have been discovered in the Old World, have any artifacts with Mormon names ever been discovered in the New World?
In the New World?
In the New World, the Americas.
No, but that's kind of a bad example because first of all, when you're searching for things in Egypt, like we know the exact location where all those things happened, and so it's easier to find out. Also, the archaeology.
Do we not know the exact location where the Book of Mormon events took place?
We don't know the exact location. I think that there are very plausible models for Mesoamerica, but here's the issue. So I would quote the non-Mormon scholar Edwin Barnhart, who says that less than 1% of Mesoamerica has been professionally surveyed and studied, especially in the jungle areas. So it's like saying, well, your son looked in the closet in your house for your keys. He didn't find them. Therefore, they're not in the house.
Would you agree that the vast majority of the old world contains sites that haven't been investigated yet? For example, we only found the Dead Sea Scrolls about 70 years ago. So there's lots of areas of the old world that haven't been explored yet, correct?
Sure, but you're talking about when you're talking about Egypt, it's the most archaeologically studied area on planet Earth.
I'm talking about the Levant region, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, those are, and they also climate-wise totally different.
Let's go.
You're talking about a jungle versus a desert.
Here's my next question: has any artifact with Hebrew or Egyptian text been discovered in the New World?
There have been some that people claim have been. I'm not familiar enough with those if they're authentic or not exactly, but there have been claims that there have been. And also the language in the Book of Mormon specifically, it talks about the fact that the language that they brought over was corrupted. And so the eventual language that was used by the Book of Mormon people was not like, they weren't speaking Reformed Egyptian in Mesoamerica.
Okay. They were speaking some other kind of language?
Yeah, they probably adopted the language of the peoples that were here.
Peoples that were here. Let's talk about that, actually.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Was Joseph Smith wrong when he said, our Western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph, which was sold into Egypt, even though 99.5% of Native American DNA comes from Asia, not the Middle East?
Yeah, he may have been mistaken in that statement because Joseph Smith didn't ever claim that he knew exactly where the Book of Mormon happened. He himself, which I think is evidence of his authenticity, he was trying to figure out, well, where exactly did these things happen? And Joseph had expressed both the possibility of happening in the heartland of America, but he also expressed that it might have happened in other places like Central America.
Did Smith ever refer to Native Americans or corpses or skeletons of Native Americans as Lamanites?
Yeah, they had thought that it might be, but none of those were like revealed statements. I don't claim infallibility of Joseph Smith, and not only that, if you're going to hold that standard, well, an atheist could turn to a Christian and be like, well, do you agree with the statement of so-and-so past pope who said things that obviously were false? Like, I think that there's a difference there. And not everything that Joseph said was claimed to be some prophetic, infallible statement.
So you're saying that,
try not to move
would you
because of the
agree that it
camera.
was a traditional view among Mormons that Native Americans in the New World, that they were primarily the descendants of the Lamanites?
Yeah, but the Book of Mormon text itself, it's interesting. So in Jacob 1:14, it says, but I, Jacob, shall not hereafter distinguish between these names, meaning the names of different groups that he encountered. But I shall call them Lamanites, those who seek to destroy the people of Nephi, and those who are friendly to Nephi, I will call Nephites. So what he was doing was setting up a very common thing in the ancient world, was to call everyone of one group, like the Greeks, they said, we're the Greeks, everyone else is barbarians. The Jews said, well, we are Jews, everyone is Gentiles. Jacob was doing that same thing.
So does it refer to other groups, specific groups who inhabited the Americas before the arrival of Jared, Lehi, and Moloch?
While it does not, that's not surprising in ethnocentric ancient histories, which often would simply lump everyone, just as Jacob did, into an entire other group, like Jews calling everyone else Gentiles, and Jacob calling everyone either Nephite or the outsiders, the Lamanites. Also, Iran, Iran and
Is it understandable someone reading the Book of Mormon would reach the conclusion that the population of the Americas were only descendants of people that had come from the old world through Jared, the Lehi, and Moloch?
A careful study of, and it wasn't Molech, I think
I said Mulek, sorry.
Mulek.
It's hard. It's very easy to come up with new names from the older words.
All right. Well, so as someone who reads it carefully, that you do not have to draw that conclusion from the text at all.
So it sounds like what you're saying, though, is that there is no specific archaeological evidence of distinctly Mormon names in the New World.
We don't know almost any of the names in the world. We don't know the names of these cities that they're discovering. If you're familiar with the LiDAR studies they're doing, they literally earlier this year found an entire 650-mile area that was under the jungle, that the jungle has consumed. We don't know what those cities were named.
Okay, but we have found the names of some settlements, like we found Cahokia, and we know that that's the name of that settlement in America.
We don't know if that was the name of that settlement anciently.
Okay.
In 2000 or in 500 BC.
Okay, so you're using a skeptical argument there.
No, I'm using the same argument that the absence of evidence is not necessarily evidence of absence, which is the exact same argument that Jimmy Akin and you guys make about the Book of Exodus.
But you seem very confident about that one old world site that we do know that's what they called it back then. That
yeah,
it was
because we have records that we found the actual the temple altars that had the name on it that date to that period.
Let's go ahead. Let's talk about the golden plates.
Okay.
All right. So however many plates there were here, let's say maybe there's like what, 60?
Oh, by the way, for the people in Idaho, these are not the actual golden plates. Just make that clear.
80? There certainly weren't 500 here. All right.
I would say we don't know what the thickness of the plates were exactly from the descriptions that the eyewitnesses left, which are
it was like tin.
They said it was like thick paper is what they described it as. Okay, so they were very thin plates. First of all, second of all, those witnesses. It's funny now you're believing what they were saying.
Yeah, it seems implausible to me. So
you're agreeing that they had plates.
Okay, so are you familiar with, I referenced the metal plates of Darius?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many English words are contained on one of the metal plates of Darius?
I'm not familiar with the details of the plates of Darius or how many there are.
Are you familiar that each plate contains about 200 English words on it?
I don't know. Fine, I'm not going to disagree with that.
Okay. So if that were the case, in order, let's say there were...
It's a trap, Jacob.
60, 80 plates here. You'd have to have thousands of words on each of these plates. So each of these characters would have to represent, 50 or 80 words in order to fit on these plates, correct?
I don't know exactly.
Don't you need the dimensions of the plates?
I can't make that prediction because I don't know anything about this language that it's coming from. I also don't know if it's a dynamic translation, which you talk about, which is where you take a text that might be smaller and then you expound upon it.
When Joseph looked in the hat, Cowdery said that he saw words that appeared and he read them off and the new words would appear. Well, I guess, what did Smith see in the hat when he was... Now, you're right, he wasn't looking at the plates, right?
Yes.
He was looking in the hat.
Yeah.
And what did he see in the hat?
Well, according to the witnesses of the translation process, okay? So what did he see in the hat?
See, I'm so ignorant of Mormonism. I didn't even know there was a hat. What did the hat look like? It was like... This sounds very magical.
We don't know.
Okay.
We have people who said that they think that they might have known, and they gave accounts of what they thought was going on, but exactly what was going on in that hat, we don't know.
Okay. So if there's 50 pages here, or whatever that might be, and you're going to have 270,000 English words just fit on this in characters, each of these characters would have to contain 50 or 80 words, like several paragraphs of meaning for each character if it's translated. Is there any hieroglyphic text that is like that we know of, where the hieroglyph represents, let's say, 50 words of information?
We don't know what the original language was or how it worked, or if it was an expansion given through revelation from God to expand ideas that were already in there.
So what Smith saw...
You know what this kind of reminds me of how some Christians who believe in a global flood explain the global flood. We don't know exactly how it worked and how the manure was thrown out, how they dealt with the carnivores, the lions, what they ate, and how when the flood stopped, that there was enough plants that grew fast enough that the herbivores would have enough to eat. But it still happened. Maybe it's just a miracle. And I think that's what Jacob is getting at here. Trent, you're talking about that, just physically this couldn't have happened. Physically, you can't fit enough words on these plates. They're possible, Trent. You agree with that, right? How is it possible a man can be revivified who's been dead for 3 days? Well, with God, all things are possible. What if the Book of Mormon, what if these plates are the result of some type of miraculous event?
It had nothing to do with this.
I'm not saying it had nothing to do with it. Absolutely not. What I'm saying is that, for instance, I would reference you to the scholar Blake Ostler and his expansion theory, the idea that some of these texts could have been expanded to give the account while the basic story outline is there in some way, it could be expanded. So I don't have a problem with that. And that's a dynamic translation that you talk about in your videos,
Yeah,
Trent.
but when I make a dynamic translation of scripture, I'm not adding 40 words or 50 words to one Greek word in the New Testament. That's where you get things that are not even translation at all. They're just dictations. All right, the text was Reformed Egyptian, correct?
whatever
it's
that
called
means.
that.
That's what they called it.
Has-
Joseph was not an expert in languages, and so he didn't.
Oh, that's true.
He didn't know that, which is great, which is wild, because someone who wasn't an expert in languages was able to come up with a dozen authentic
That's why
names.
it's a miracle.
So has any copy of the text on the alleged golden plates, have any copies of the characters survived to this day so that we can examine?
So there is a disputed one that scholars dispute called the characters document, which is something that, again, it's a scholarly dispute.
Is the characters document based on writing on the golden plates that was shown to a classicist named Charles Anthon?
We don't know if that document...
You realize what Trent just asked? He basically asked Jacob, do we have any of the original plates? Anything original to verify this? Can't Jacob or an atheist ask Trent, do we have the originals of the Gospels? Of any part of the New Testament? No, it's lost.
Document that was used.
Okay, but do people say that it's based on Anthon? Did Martin Harris present copies of the characters
According
to Anthon?
Yes, so...
No, you had a lot of fun interrupting. I'm going to do mine now.
Okay.
Did Anthon, saying after he met Harris, describe from Anthon, did he firsthand account call the letters mere trash?
So here is what Anthon did. Martin Harris was very skeptical of Joseph Smith. So he took the characters to Anthon. And then when he came back from Anthon, Martin Harris was more convinced than ever that Joseph...
No, I'm asking you,
You're
what
right.
did
I have to give-
Anthon say? What did
Anthon, later in life, in the late 1830s, Mormonism starts to kick off. And people go, Anthon, Martin's saying that you verified this. And he goes, no, I didn't. No, I said it was trash. Because at that time, Mormonism was already going. But if you actually go back, you have to wonder, why would Martin Harris take this to a scholar? Why would Joseph take it to a scholar at all?
So you're saying Anthon's just lying about what happened?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible that Harris lied because he was financially stressed
Good
about
job,
mortgaging his own farm, and that if the Book of Mormon failed...
Remember I said this like 10, 15 minutes ago? Just give the line explanation. And now Trent's going with this.
would be in financial ruin? Is it possible?
No.
It's not possible?
Here's what I'm saying, Trent. He went to a scholar before he mortgaged the farm. It's after the scholar said what he said to him that he went and mortgaged the farm.
Okay.
Thanks, Alex. Faith Strengthened by Isaac of Troki. It's a work by a 16th century Jew who rips apart the New Testament. You should look it up. Okay. Maybe I will. For $19.99, I think I better, right? Thanks, Alex.
That he was worried he was going to be duped. You are misreading Martin Harris if you think that he was some dupe.
No.
He was trying. He did multiple things to test Joseph, including putting a different stone in his hat because they said he was translating from a stone.
Right.
And Joseph looked at it and said, "I can't translate this."
Is it possible that Smith realized it was a different stone?
Is
it possible?
Possibility is such a ridiculous standard.
And
it's
he
possible.
realized...
I agree. Jacob, here's some advice from PineCreek Doug. Whenever a person asks you a question, is it possible? Before they even finish their sentence, say yes. And then say anything's possible in the magical kingdom.
There are unicorns on Mars somewhere. It's possible.
Is it possible? I'm familiar with this trick that Harris thinks he's clever. He switches the seer stone, and then Smith says, "Oh, I can't translate anymore." Is it possible Smith saw the stone was different and recognized he was being tested?
Okay,
is it possible?
It's possible. What it shows a skepticism in Martin Harris. He was not a dupe. He was very skeptical, and it was after a bunch of things happened that he mortgaged the farm.
Or is it possible Harris was trying to please his wife and other family members who were the skeptical ones giving him pressure? Is that possible?
It's possible.
Okay.
But regardless, he went to Anthon.
Let's go.
Trent, is it possible that the reason why Paul, who was formerly named Saul, converted to Christianity because maybe he had a sister or a mother who converted, or a first cousin or something, and he felt guilty for persecuting the Christians, and that guilt led him to have this vision that led him to become a follower of Christ. Is it possible? Is it possible? Of course it is.
Came back more convinced than ever.
Okay. Let's see here. Martin Harris gave an 1859 interview in Tiffany's magazine, And he recounted when Joseph Smith and his company went money digging.
You know what's funny about that? He's talking about Mormons giving interviews. Do we have any examples of any of the authors of the New Testament giving interviews to third parties? Yes, I'm sitting here today with the author of the Gospel of Mark. Welcome, author of the Gospel of Mark. What's your first name? Oh, you want to remain anonymous. Okay, good enough. By the way, we're filming this interview in southern France. The network is called the FFR, the French Republic newspaper. And here we are with the author of Mark. Mark, when did it tell me about the first? How do you know this Jesus guy?
Digging once, and he said that one of the men told him that there was, when they went money digging, all kinds of strange things would happen. That like a large man who appeared to be 8 or 9 feet tall came and sat on the ridge of a barn and told them to leave.
Who are you talking about? Who gave this quote?
Harris gave that. He gave that in an interview related to what one of the men who was with Smith when they were money. Was Smith involved in money digging, treasure hunting?
It was so Joseph was from an indigent, poor family, and they were offered basically like work to help someone named, I believe it was Josiah Stoll, to go and look for a treasure that he had heard about. And so Joseph Smith was involved in that venture. Joseph was a teenager at the time. I mean, I've done some dumb things as a teenager. I think you guys have too. And he later said that he kind of regretted it and he felt dumb about it.
Okay, it is, and I'm saying in the 1859 interview in Tiffany's that Martin Harris gave, he said the men encountered a 9-foot tall being that told them to leave when they were out treasure hunting. Do you think that happened?
I'm not familiar with that source.
Okay, I would recommend you look into it.
Oh, Trent, you sound just like me. I mean, the New Testament records that a guy named Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water next to a guy named Jesus. Do you believe that happened? Trent sounds so skeptical of a man being 8 or 9 feet tall. Where's the skepticism coming from?
Me feel like Martin Harris is a bit gullible
it's a good
in that
thing.
regard.
It's a good thing,
Bit
though, that we're not
gullible.
just relying on Martin Harris. We have plenty of other witnesses as well.
Okay, but were all of the witnesses were excommunicated, and one of them, Cowdery, returned to the church?
No, Martin Harris also did. And also,
Did Martin Harris join? How many?
he went and followed the Brighamites out to Utah. He died in Utah.
How many religions did Martin Harris belong to in his life?
Quite a few, but he never denied his testimony in the Book of Mormon. The reality is that these guys had falling out with Joseph Smith, which is all the more reason to believe them because they had every incentive to deny
David
it.
Whitmer said, God spoke to me by his own voice from the heavens and told me to separate myself from among the Latter-day Saints. Do you think God told David Whitmer that?
Do you want to answer that, and then we'll go?
Yeah, absolutely. So David Whitmer was at that time very, very upset with Joseph. He was, and he had believed that Joseph was a fallen prophet. And so he was angry and he made that statement, but he never denied his testimony in the Book of Mormon.
So you don't believe God didn't tell Whitmer to leave?
No.
Okay, so you don't believe Whitmer when he said that, you believe Whitmer on other things.
Yeah, is that time?
That is time, yeah.
All right.
All right, thanks, guys. That was really great, very vigorous, awesome. Okay, we're going to move into a time of Q&A from the audience. It's going to be 30 minutes overall. The way I'd like to try to do this is to direct a question to each of you respectively. The
I'll only listen to it if the questions are interesting.
person who's directed the question is divulge, then click start. Questions. Connor Michael Brewster says, and this is directed to you, Jacob,
I
on
can already tell I don't
Revelation.
like that question.
I think the Catholics can maybe pardon if a mistake was ever made with us.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad that Jacob says that, but I believe there are deeper issues about that it wasn't an arbitrary decision of prohibiting blacks from entering the priesthood. It comes from very concerning issues I'd recommend people to look into about the nature of the Nephites and the Lamanites in the Book of Mormon, and the traditional view that Mormons held that the Native Americans were descendants of the Lamanites, the cursing of dark skin. It's something I would just encourage people to look into.
All right. Okay, we have a question here for Trent from
They didn't have DEI back then.
Marty Staffnick. What makes the Catholic faith less outlandish than the LDS, especially when it comes to things like Marian apparitions or all the supernatural things with Padre Pio?
We know where it happened. We have direct archaeological evidence. Like we have, for example, the Pilate stone that has Pontius Pilate's name on it. We have ancient manuscripts going back thousands of years to attest to these events. We're not proposing things happened in Israel that couldn't possibly have happened, or the existence of civilizations for which there's no evidence for. So Catholicism is quite different in that we are not proposing.
Wait a minute. You honestly think Catholicism is more reasonable? Trent, you believe that a baby was born that's God, the being God, that grew up, did many miracles, like walk on water, bring the dead back to life, multiply loaves and fishes, died, and rose again, and then walked the earth about 40 days, and then went above sea level and rose into the clouds, and then poof, gone. And then that someday, this God named Jesus will come back on a white horse to collect the elect, his children, who are still alive, but the dead will bubble through the dirt, and these corpses or bones or whatever will rise, and he will meet Jesus on a white horse in the air. Seriously, Trent? You think Catholicism is more reasonable than Mormonism? Maybe we should have a crazy off. Which one's more crazy?
Proposing nearly as much as Mormonism does and doesn't have evidence to support it. We have far more ancient groundings for the belief. We're not just taking somebody's word in 1830, talking about something that happened thousands of years later.
Whose word are you taking then?
Manuscripts going back to the 2nd century, and we have churches that were
manuscripts going back to the 2nd century. You have fragments going back to the 2nd century.
Founded.
And just because you have a fragment doesn't mean that the core proposition of Christianity is true. Just like you said, you might have some metal plates. That doesn't mean that God, through the angel Moroni, told Joseph Smith some weird Egyptian language to translate, right?
From the beginning of the time of the apostles, attesting to the basic beliefs of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we have the initial event witnessing Christ's resurrection is not a mere visionary experience. We have tactile encounters.
Tactile encounters written in the third person. We don't have anything like the Mormons have, where it's said, yeah, Jesus touched me. My name is Thomas, and I know this Jesus guy, and I didn't believe it. I thought this was all ridiculous, but here I was, minding my own business, and then my friend Peter says, hey, Thomas, get over here. Yeah, remember Jesus? Yeah, this is the guy we followed? Yeah, he died. Yeah, I know he died. Well, no, this is him. I don't believe you. Kind of looks like him, but not really. Well, look at his hands. Look at his feet. Put your finger in his holes. The holes from the nails, not the other holes. And then Thomas said, I believe it. But we don't have that. We have, and there once was a man named Thomas type of thing. And he doubted. And then, of course, it was written decades and decades after the purported event. That's what you do have. You don't have an eyewitness account.
People who were not expecting it because you didn't expect a Messiah to die and rise again. And of course, we have an empty tomb where if you really thought your rabbi had come back from the dead, you can go and check out and see, no, this is an actual bodily resurrection.
Yeah, and funny enough, the earliest, the only eyewitness account we have is Paul, where he said, I, Paul, Jesus appeared to me. Never talked about a tomb. It was only like a decade or so after, then the idea of a tomb came along. And then the tomb in one gospel is not like the tomb in another gospel. One is in a garden, and the other one's just on the side of a rock. And I mean,
We have an abundance of more evidence for Christianity and
False.
far fewer, really no problems compared to what Mormonism faces. So I believe the two are vastly different.
Well, that's true. They're vastly different, but I would say the evidence for Mormonism is far superior, more detailed, signed, eyewitness accounts, interviews.
So it's funny because the eyewitnesses that he's talking about, he doesn't have actual eyewitness accounts. He has later documents that are found that were written anonymously decades and decades after the event. And the nearest manuscripts of those are like 100 years old. And that's just for the New Testament stuff. When it comes to the witnesses, we have more witnesses. We have better witnesses as far as the numbers. And then in addition to that, he says like, oh, well, there isn't any archaeological evidence. Well, Trent believes in the divine inspiration of the book of Exodus, despite the fact that we know where it happened. And we don't find armies at the bottom of the Red Sea.
Okay. Question for Jacob. Do you think the early church fathers and apostles got Jesus' teachings wrong? If so, why?
Say yes.
I think he's referring to the Great Apostasy.
So, yeah, again, I'm not sure what this has to do with the Book of Mormon. It has more to do with the subject of the Great Apostasy. But as far as the early church fathers, I believe that they had a whole bunch of things right. The Great Apostasy, there's a big misnomer that people have about it.
Don't be
we
nice,
don't believe
Jacob.
that all truth was suddenly like sucked from the earth and was what the apostasy is. It's the loss of this connection for God's direct revelation to man through those who hold apostolic key. It indeed cease. And I think there's a point of agreement there.
Yeah, there's an agreement that public revelation ended in the apostolic age, but Mormons believe it's far more than that. Not just that the authority to give public revelation ended, but the authority to bind believers and to teach them that ceased. And not just that, but that the church of Jesus Christ, the church Christ established, no longer existed after the time of the apostles and was replaced with a great and abominable church. And that this church Christ established, that the council, I'm sure Jacob would say the Council of Nicaea did not have authority to bind Christians to Trinitarian doctrine. But we believe that because we believe the church of Jesus Christ never left the face of the earth, that the successors of the apostles, they could not give new revelation, but they were capable of binding believers to a greater understanding of the original revelation that was be given. And the argument I gave was still not answered, that if Catholicism is true, if you do believe that, then naturally Mormonism would be false.
Okay.
We have a Muslim in the live stream chat. To be fair, with all the Christian craziness, it's still more reasonable to believe in atheist core doctrine, something came from nothing, and then fish magically transformed into an ape. Most atheists, I've never talked to an atheist who believes that something came from nothing. Most atheists believe that the cosmos is eternal past. And yeah, I mean, evolution is hard to believe. I can understand people's perspective on that. But we have, for that extraordinary claim, we have extraordinary evidence. The DNA evidence is pretty amazing.
Bit of a straw man there.
Oh, straw man?
Question for you, Trent, from TA from YouTube. He says, I would love to hear what Horn believes are the criteria necessary to prove a thing is divinely inspired.
Whoa.
Sure. I think I would go back. So why do I believe this is important in my journey actually as a Christian, that I came to believe that God existed, and from historical evidence that Christ rose from the dead. And I did that without believing the Bible is divinely inspired. I just believe that these are ancient documents that come, and it's not just from secondhand or non-eyewitnesses or anonymous sources. We know Paul wrote his letters. We know Paul knew the apostles, and Paul testifies to Jesus' post-resurrection appearances.
Yeah. And I seem to remember asking Trent when I debated him, if all you had was Paul's letters, would you believe Jesus Christ rose from the dead? And if memory serves, Trent, you said, I don't know. You didn't say, of course I would, because we have an eyewitness account. You didn't say that. But now it seems like you are saying that. Well, you're not finished talking.
We know Luke was a companion of Paul, and Luke describes the post-resurrection appearances. No reason to make up a Luke. If you're going to make up somebody, why some anonymous guy like Luke? So historically, I can demonstrate that a miracle occurred and began the Christian faith and the Christian church. So from there...
Okay, what's more likely? that Joseph Smith was a bit of a con man, that maybe he had some plates, but they weren't really the plates given by God, or that they were given by God. What's more likely, Trent? That Joseph Smith was a bit of a con man, and these plates weren't given by God. What's more likely? That the authors of the New Testament actually saw a risen Jesus, actually walked and talked with him, or that it's a story made up by men, a type of propaganda. What's more likely? You see what happens here, Trent? You can very easily see it with the Mormons, but you can't see it with yourself. Because I got theories on why people can't see or hear the things that it's because you got so much invested in this belief. Your wife would cry and maybe even leave you if you started to think like me. You see positive fruits, just like Jacob sees fruits in his life by being a Mormon. And you see atheists being crazy people, and you don't want to be a crazy person. If that's your answer, I'll say, good for you. Stay a Catholic. Jacob, stay a Mormon. Because you see positive fruits, there's pragmatic results. That would be a good answer. But don't tell me that you think it's actually true based on this evidence. Oh yeah, he would lose his job. Good point, T. Grogan.
There, though, the reason I believe that the 73 books of the Bible are divinely inspired is because the church Jesus Christ established authoritatively taught that, first at local regional councils and then at an ecumenical council in the 16th century. And as I noted earlier in the debate, this canon problem also exists for Mormons as well, because they would say the 1611 King James Bible is inspired as far as it's correctly translated. But why would one believe that when it was believed when Joseph...
So the question was, people forget what the question is if people answer too long. The question was, what was the question? What's the criteria to say that something is divinely written and divinely inspired? And he went to the historical answer. Well, because history has shown that these things happened, and the inference is only God could make these things happen, so therefore we trust it is divinely inspired. But it's much more likely that people lie, people are mistaken, people make up stories, people are partly right, mostly wrong.
Joseph Smith believed that before he ever received a revelation from an angel. Well, the Bible came from the church that Christ established, and that's why I believe it's divinely inspired, and the church says the Book of Mormon is not.
Okay, so it is funny. Trent did just admit, at the base of his worldview, when you dig down, why do you believe in all of this stuff? The book of Exodus to be inspired despite its lack of archaeological evidence. He says, because of witnesses to the resurrection. And I said, what witnesses? Well, we got maybe 3, and it's from late accounts.
Which 3?
And they're anonymous, and one of them was just a visionary account with Paul, and...
I think the 3 Trent's thinking of is Paul, for sure, Peter, and maybe James? But James never identifies himself in the first person and says, I saw Jesus rise from the dead, or I've seen the risen Savior. Peter never says that. James never says that. If you don't believe me, Christians, open up the book of 1 Peter, 2 Peter, and read it for yourself. It says that Peter says that I'm a witness to the pain, to the sufferings of Jesus. But he never actually comes out and says that he saw the resurrected Jesus. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. It can't be Thomas. I don't think Trent's thinking of Thomas, because there's no book that is even claimed to be written by Thomas in the New Testament. Remember, an eyewitness account is an account where someone says in the first person, they say, this is what I saw. It's not, this is what he saw. That's not an eyewitness account.
And, okay, I got 3. And we don't even have like the actual things. But on the other hand, I'm presenting 19 eyewitness accounts with hundreds of accounts, and then all he can do to rebut that is to bring up sort of obvious, sort of anti people that are against them, who are trying to.
I'm just a farm boy from Manitoba, but I do know that 19 is bigger than 3.
To catch them in their words, but he hasn't looked at the you could just go read Richard Anderson's book on the witnesses of the Book of Mormon. Their testimonies are solid.
Spencer in the live stream chat says Peter saw Jesus resurrected and had to answer for his betrayal at the arrest when Peter said it was. Spencer, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about, did Peter ever identify himself in the first person and say, I, Peter, a servant of God, or something like that, saw the resurrected Jesus? I dare you. I'm scared to actually say this, Spencer, because you're probably a Christian. And you're probably maybe hearing this for the first time. That Peter, he didn't write the Gospels. And even the epistles, he doesn't say this.
They never denied them. They were sincere. And those are the same criteria that he uses to believe the apostles.
Exactly right.
So it's a clear and obvious double standard.
You're right,
Connor
Jacob.
Michael Brewster asks you, Jacob,
I feel
if
your
the
pain,
church
Jacob.
was corrupted and it took until Joseph Smith to restore it, why is the King James version of the Bible to be trusted from 1601, which is well before Smith?
Again, this is based on a misconception. We do believe that, I'm a big fan of the Catholic Church. Like I went to Catholic schools. I'm sending my kids to Catholic schools. I believe that the Christian movement and denominations and all of that they did continue to preach the truth, to share on the words of the
He
people
sends his kids to Catholic schools? Did he say schools or church?
who held.
Schools.
We do believe that, I'm a big fan of the Catholic Church. Like I went to Catholic schools. I'm sending my kids to Catholic schools. I believe that the Christian
Do the Mormons not have good schools?
movement and denominations and all of that they did continue to preach the truth, to share on the words of the people who held apostolic and prophetic authority in the past. And so of course we're gonna adopt that.
Correct, Anna.
And our belief is that these good Christian churches, like you guys, see, the difference is you guys look at me and you go, Jacob Hansen is going to be tortured forever, eternally by God in hell because he doesn't join the Catholic Church because he's Mormon.
I hope they respond to this. Jacob, I hope you do this. I hope you look right into the eyes of Matt Fradd and right into the eyes of Trent Horn and say, if I am following a false gospel, what happens to me in the afterlife? Make them come out and say it. Don't let them hedge and say something, well, we don't know. It's only God to judge. Do it in the form of a hypothetical. If I die a Mormon who believes that in a different Jesus than you do, where do you think, where do you believe my eternal life will reside? Make them say it, because they are so embarrassed to say it. I don't know why. Maybe they will say it.
I look at you guys and I say, you guys are wonderful Christians, and your Christian church has taken you so far that you actually will go to a heaven probably very similar to what you imagine. But what we have brought is something to add on to what you guys have. And so
I love that. We have something that add on to what you already have. And the Christians took what the Jews had and added on. So really, out of all the Abrahamic faiths, the Mormon one is the most updated. Like if it was software, it'd be it's the one to have. Because it's the newest, right? Is there a newer one than Mormonism? Maybe, but it's not really caught on yet. But yeah, the software update patch is Mormonism.
believe that the Bible and all of this, it is wonderful. It's true. It's good. It takes people towards Jesus Christ. I'm just saying, don't stop there. There's more that God has revealed and will reveal to the world, and come join with us so that you can have something bigger than you even have now, which is great what you have now.
I really don't know how Jacob could say the church has taken us so far when the church teaches so many things directly contrary to Mormonism, that the church teaches us there is only one God. He exists as three co-equal and co-eternal persons, whereas Mormonism teaches God.
Technically, yeah, the Bible teaches that there are many gods, small g. So when Trent says the Bible teaches or the church teaches there's only one God, he means capital G. He's a henotheist, I'm sure. But I'm sure Trent believes that, for example, Satan is real, and he's the God of the world. So there's more than one God. There's at least two. And if you read Isaiah 51, no. Where's it, the council of the gods? Yeah, I think it's Isaiah 51.
Are just of the same species, and men can become gods. And I guess maybe I'm going to get my own consolation prize heaven, and Jacob will get his own universe to run. So I guess I get to miss out on that. But how could he say that the Catholic Church brought us so far when it teaches directly contrary against the Mormon view of who God is, the Mormon view of who Jesus is, the fact that Jesus and the devil are eternal intelligences, or they were both begotten of the Father, so technically Jesus and the devil are brothers because they both have the same heavenly Father who begot them.
Tolerant.
If you go down this way, I don't see how he could say anything, that he should just say no, like previous Mormons did in the past, not saying it's official Mormon teaching, but previous Mormons who said that when the Book of Mormon refers to the great and abominable church, it's referring to the Catholic Church.
Okay. Question for Trent from the Kolob Society. Some say
That's from far away.
some say Joseph Smith's faults
Kolob is a
mean he
planet
was
that
not a
God
prophet.
lives on.
Do the faults of the Catholic Church leaders invalidate the authority of the Catholic Church? Why or why not?
My argument was not that his faults prove he is not.
Yeah, of course, it's not Isaiah. Psalm 82 is the divine council scene. Thank you, Andrew. It's been such a long time.
Prophet. When you look at the prophets in Scripture, many of them are flawed. Look at Jonah, for example. My argument was, if we are assessing Joseph Smith's testimony, we have to assess the man's character. We have to assess, is this person an honest individual?
Yeah. See, and this is the problem. You can't do that with the authors of the New Testament. With Joseph Smith, you can go back and get details from various sources, independent sources, of the type of man Joseph Smith was. Try that with Paul. Try that with Matthew, John, Peter, Luke. The only thing you know about them is what they themselves, or what the New Testament says about them.
And so one of the examples that I gave showing that he was not honest was that he purposefully hid that if these plural marriages were such a good thing, he certainly seemed to go intensively to hide them from his wife Emma when he went to seal himself with other people, like Emily and Eliza Partridge, for example. Or you had people like Oliver Cowdery calling. So this is not just anti-Mormons. I'm citing Cowdery, and I'm citing others who know Joseph himself, like Fair, the Mormon apologist, saying, yeah, you're right, he wasn't really honest about this. It makes us question, well, are there other things he wasn't entirely honest about?
Yeah, so first of all, most of the things that Trent is talking about, even the stuff from the church or Fair Mormon and stuff, they're talking about the allegations against him. The reality is that we know very little about what actually happened, and there's all these allegations. So they're talking about, yeah, there were allegations that potentially...
Feel free. If you're like, you know what, let's stick to the topic, that's fine. But here's the question. How can you be sure Joseph Smith was a true prophet when later prophets who held his same position as prophet can outright teach heresy? For example, Brigham Young's Adam God revelation.
So you'd fire right back and be like, how can you guys believe in the Catholic Church when they burn people at the stake? And expelled all the Jews from Spain and other places. I mean, the same thing can be leveled against the Catholic Church. The reality is we don't have any standard of infallibility
like that, because as Catholics, we know what it's like to have our beliefs universe. Our beliefs mocked and misinterpreted, right? And I don't appreciate that. And so here's the comment, and
I'm not a psychologist. I just play one on the internet. But when he talked about being mocked, look what he did with his middle finger and glasses.
Beliefs mocked and misinterpreted, right? And I don't appreciate that. And so here's the comment, and this guy's trying to be snarky, but I want to give you the opportunity.
That's totally
right?
fine.
Let's see. Where was it? Oh, yeah. We'll see who's laughing once I inherit a planet full of blonde alien babes to create my own Mormon Star Wars Imperial Army. Checkmate Trent. So could you help us Catholics understand what the Mormon Church does teach about having your own...
So this is one of those things. It's. I think there was a quote by C.S. Lewis about playing harps forever in heaven and how people don't want to do that. The reality is when we're talking about the afterlife, in sort of metaphorical language, we're talking about us becoming co-participants with God in the divine God, like life that God has, right? That's what eternal life is, to become as he is and to participate in the great creation process that goes on into eternity. We believe that we are children of God, and a child grows up to be like his father, like a puppy. What does a puppy grow up to be? Grows up to be a dog. A kitten grows up to be a cat, right? We believe that we are children of God as the Bible teaches. And we don't believe that's some metaphor. We believe we were literally created in the image of God, and we are not different in kind from him. And what we will use is certain sorts of kind of metaphorical language to talk about what that may be. And there's been a lot of speculation about, well, God created this earth, that means we're going to create one. And what that's kind of been is it's been spun into a sort of caricature of a idea of what eternity might be like. Now, and I kind of laugh, and Trent, we kind of laughed about it too when we were talking.
So his answer is basically, we don't know what happens after we die, what it's going to be like. And I think if the Christian's honest, they would give the same answer. But from what the New Testament says about the afterlife, if you're a Christian, it'll be streets of gold, no tears. For me personally, I prefer platinum. I prefer tears. I prefer struggles and overcoming having a goal and overcoming it. If there's no tears in heaven, count me out. If everybody is, if it's sort of like a progressive woke kumbaya session where everybody has tie-dye shirts and is eating granola, count me out. I want to be able to, like, I don't know, play a game against someone in heaven and beat them and have them cry. You know what I mean.
Like, oh, well, Mormons each get their own planet. And I kind of laugh. It's like, no, my own universe, like whatever God is able to do, that is something that a human being has the capacity to do in an eternal...
We've solved all of them. Well, if you go and look at the explanations, they're incredibly rickety. And I would say they're only solved if you don't press upon them. So the Book of Mormon is very clear. It talks about horses and chariots, and it groups them together as if the horses have something to...
Why the Book of Mormon is divinely inspired. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, well, so we'll start with you.
I think the best argument against the Book of Mormon is the atheist sort of argument that's against all of this. Okay? The idea is we're talking about miracles happening in the 1800s. It's very easy to think about miracles happening a long time ago, but when they get closer to home, we start to get like, I don't think this could happen today.
He's right about this, and I'm not sure why this is. A lot of people are skeptical, Mormons and Christians alike are skeptical when they hear miracle claims today, but push them back 1,000 years or even 300 years, and it's like, it's more believable. Why is that? Is there a Christian here who can explain that to me? Because I bet you there's reasonable Christians listening right now or on the replay who hear miracle claims and go, that's BS. That's baloney. That didn't happen. But they believe Jesus rose from the dead, walked on water. Is the fact that it happened so long ago make it more likely to you? And if the answer is yes, I mean, why? What's going on in your head?
You know, back in the day, armies were swallowed by the sea in the Reed Sea, and the atheist presents a consistent position where they say, look, all of this is hocus pocus. And I think that is a position that I think remains consistent and actually makes the case against the Book of Mormon.
And this is precisely why when Mormons leave Mormonism, they become atheists, because they see behind the curtain. They see, oh, if Mormonism is yeah, this is all just, I mean, what was I thinking?
When you're not an atheist and suddenly these things are in the realm of possibility, then suddenly they become possible.
Okay, and I got to clear something up for the Christians and Mormons listening. I don't de facto say miracles are impossible. I would personally love to see a miracle. I'm being honest and sincere here. And I'm not the type of atheist who will just say, oh, we just don't have a naturalistic explanation for this yet. And by the way, I define a miracle as the breaking of the known laws of nature. So if I don't have water or glass here, but actually I do. Hang on. There's always new people here, so I gotta always remind them of my markers. Here's a little bit of, I had Pepsi. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah prayed to the gods and his God, Yahweh, to light up water-soaked wood on fire. Here's a water-soaked Kleenex. See it dripping? If Jacob can pray to his God and make this light up on fire, if Trent can pray to his God and light this up on fire, I'm not trying to trick myself. Seriously. I know the truth. You guys back, if it actually lit on fire, the people watching at home will probably say, oh, this is a trick. But not me. Because I know the truth. I know what this is. If you light this on fire, I drop naturalism. Case closed. You want to try it, Jacob? You want to try it, Trent? Thou shalt not test the Lord your God. In fact, we can even ask Satan to do it. How's that? I will drop naturalism if Satan can light this on fire. There's no rules against testing Satan. Bazinga. I don't know why I'm saying bazinga today. I got Sheldon Cooper in my brain.
That the strongest arguments against the Book of Mormon come from an atheist worldview that sort of presupposes that all of this is hocus pocus anyway, though they struggle to deal with the evidences that I've presented today.
All right, Trent, we're going to clip this out and make you a Mormon on YouTube one day. Right. Give us the best argument for the Book of Mormon being divinely inspired.
You got to give me a little bit of hair dye.
They're still mad at each other.
Eye
That's what's
contacts to really sell it then. Yeah, I would say that Jacob gave a very... probably one of the higher level defenses of the Book of Mormon. So I think that I think it probably gets maybe the silver medal of trying to say, well, the argument would go, if you believe in Christianity and we have better evidence for Mormonism, then you should believe in Mormonism, would essentially be the argument, I think, one is
well
making.
Done, Trent.
I think, though, probably the strongest argument that I think many people like, strong in the sense that it's very difficult to overcome.
I don't think you guys realize the admission Trent just made there. If you believe in Christianity for reasons of eyewitness accounts, then you ought to believe in Mormonism. If you believe in Christianity because of the inner testimony of the Holy Spirit, you ought to believe in Mormonism. Well done, Trent.
Argument from personal testimony. Yeah. And I think the vast majority of Mormons would say that they are Mormon because they trust the witness of the Holy Spirit. They have a personal testimony. Even if they can't explain everything in the faith and they can't overcome these objections, I know in my heart I've had an encounter with God, and I know that this is true. And I think that can be very difficult.
Oh, and by the way, this is to the Christians listening. This is a little bit of politics as well. If you believe in Christianity because of the inner witness of the inner witness of the Holy Spirit, if you believe in Mormonism because of the burning of the bosom and that inner testimony of God, that internal experience, then you ought to believe a trans woman who says, I'm a woman when they were born male. Right? Internal experience. Get it? Same thing. The Christians are going, oh no, what have I done? Oh no.
Present into to overcome with evidence, because especially if you are reliant on these sort of inner testimonies. And what I get really concerned about is if that inner testimony starts to fray and fracture. Jacob and I were talking about this last night. Many Mormons go straight from Mormonism to secularism or atheism without taking more of an evidential approach like Jacob has.
All right. Thank you, fellows. This has been terrific. We're going to close now with 5-minute closing statements each.
I think we'll skip the closing statements. But well done, both of you. It was civil. It was Trent and Jacob. It was civil, but yet still spirited. I think Jacob did amazingly well. Good for you, Jacob. I would say Jacob won this debate because he had the harder work. The debate claim was, is the Book of Mormon divinely inspired? So he's taken the positive yes. All Trent has to do is poke holes in it and cause doubt. Trent was basically playing the role of an atheist towards this God. And it's always easier to do that than actually defend the stranger claim. So good for you, Jacob. And you sounded like me many times. I'll focus on the chat for a bit. What were your thoughts? Who won this debate from what I shown here? The visitor asked, what would I do if it did light? Well, I would drop naturalism and I would try to figure out what is the correct form of theism. If the water-soaked napkin lit in the name of Allah, I'd be predisposed to becoming a Muslim, and so forth. Bacon Sarney says, trans is just a non-theistic religion, no more or less valid than Christianity, Islam, Mormon, etc. I agree. See, I'm a consistent atheist. If I'm going to say it's not sufficient to say Jesus is real because of an internal experience, Mormonism is true because of an internal experience, I am a man even though I was born female, I know this is true because of an internal experience. I'm consistent. I say it's all rubbish. Glory to Joseph Smith, peace be upon him. I guess I should show the comments here. Whoa. Whoop. The Holy Spirit is supposed to convict you and correct your behavior. Trans affirms rather than convicts. Well, hang on. The inner testimony of the Holy Spirit is the affirming. It's a evidence that, in the case of Christianity, that you're a child of God, that Jesus lives in you. Your identity in Christianity is in Christ. Your identity as a trans person is that your experience is of the opposite sex of what you were born with. Although opposite gender, which is correlated to sex, is more appropriate. Atheists hate it. Woke atheists hate it when I say this, but it's true. Mormonism is less than 0.2% of the world population? Well, just because there's very few Mormons doesn't mean it's false by definition. I mean, false because of that. In the same way, just because Christianity is the biggest religion doesn't mean it's true. In fact, you could take the opposite. Since most of the planet are not Christians, does that make Christianity false? Do Mormons believe in hell? No, they believe in different heavens, different worlds, different universes. I forget the name of the lowest version. But if Mormonism is true, I will end up basically living in the hood. And I tell you, I will be the king of the hood. Hey guys, thanks for hanging out. It was fun to talk about theism again. Have a good night.